Now, more details continue to emerge from the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial. Just yesterday, the court heard how the weapon used to kill the football star was allegedly stolen during a cash-in-transit robbery. But today we go back and we'll hear from the lead forensic investigator, that's Thabo Mosia, who's set to be cross-examined by the defense. Mosia was one of the first officers on the scene and has testified to some shortcomings on his investigation. But eNCA's Manqoba Mchunu is in court now. So let's get the very latest from him before proceedings get underway this morning. Manqoba, a very warm good morning to you, colleague. Perhaps let's start with context. We've seen Thabo Mosia before. He's back again, but this time around the defense having an opportunity to cross-examine him on some of the shortcomings of his investigation.
Well, certainly, Dumelo, and of course you recall that the reason why Thabo Mosia has been recalled to the stand is because there were still some questions that the defense had as far as that investigation is concerned. Of course, they are contending that there was contamination of the crime scene and that the crime scene itself had been compromised. We've heard evidence from this court, from other witnesses suggesting that the police had left that particular crime scene with the occupants of the house, and at some point, also just after this had happened, the police officers that were first to arrive on the scene, the constables that were there, had actually left the scene and had gone to the hospital to attend to where Senzo Meyiwa had been taken at the time, leaving the crime scene with a relative from the Khumalo home. And of course, there were questions as to whether or not there could have been evidence tampering that could have happened as a result of the police failing to secure that particular crime scene. And of course, we know now that Thabo Mosia was the first investigative or forensic investigator to arrive at the particular scene. He says that he received a call only 4 hours after Senzo Meyiwa had been shot, and he only managed to arrive at that particular crime scene at 20 past midnight on the 27th of October. And from what we heard from his evidence here in court is that he had then, searched the scene for clues. He had then, taken evidence, photos that he took. But on that particular morning, he did not find a bullet projectile, which we know now is also at the center of this particular case. What he says is that he only managed to find this particular projectile the next morning, or in fact, hours later, Tumelo, on the 27th, when they returned to the scene, now accompanied by two other forensic investigators that were also on the scene, Thobeka Mhlahlo and Colonel Zwane. And we understand that it was actually Thobeka Mhlahlo that found this particular projectile. And he also admitted, Tumelo, as far as the evidence is concerned, that he did not swab the kitchen door, which we know now was used by the intruders to gain entry into the house. He also says that he did not swab the bedroom door where Tumelo Madlala had gone and hid, and allegedly one of the intruders had then tried to follow him on that particular room. But also crucially, what he also admitted was the fact that he did not swab any of those people that were inside the house for any gunpowder residue to rule out whether or not they were involved in this particular shooting that had happened. But I think we also face quite tough questions about the handling of the evidence. We know that he had put that bullet projectile in a brown envelope and he had then put it in a seal bag. And what the defense is saying is that the reason why perhaps it had been put in that brown envelope was to conceal it, because you cannot see it with the naked eye, what is inside that particular brown envelope. So many questions being raised about how the forensic investigators handled that particular crime scene. And of course, those are some of the questions that were posed to Mosia. But what was the issue that brings him here today is the issue around his movements on that day. You recall that Thabo Mosia himself had indicated that at some point he left that particular crime scene to attend to two other matters that had happened. And during that time, the defense is contending that there could have been planting of that bullet projectile and contamination of the crime scene. So there were questions about his movement on that particular morning with the defense, the lawyer for accused number 4, Zitulele Nxumalo, requesting some of the registers and the books or the pocketbook of Mosia to confirm his movements and what he said here in court around his investigation of that particular crime scene. And so those registers were brought into court, I think days later, and his evidence had been adjourned so that he can be cross-examined on this particular aspect. But we know that it's going to face grueling cross-examination as far as those are concerned, because already from what we've heard in court, there are discrepancies as far as the times are concerned. He says in court that he only arrived back on the scene at 6 a.m. in the morning, but the register seems to suggest that he only arrived just shortly before 11 o'clock in the morning. And of course, also another issue is the issue around a scratching, information that has been scratched out on that register as far as his arrival on the scene is also concerned. But also, I think yesterday, Tumelo, we heard evidence was surrounding that firearm, and the crucial evidence seemingly suggesting that that firearm was stolen from a security company, rather a cash in transit carrier, SBV. And the significance of all of this is to show that, in fact, that firearm was linked to accused number 3, Mthobisi Mncube. But I think, Tumelo, just to take it further, I'm not sure whether we do have Elton Hart online. Perhaps can indicate if we do have him. But perhaps if he can explain to us the significance of all of this.
Manqoba, it seems like we may not have Elton Hart at this moment. All right, I hear from the team saying that he's right there. Let's listen in. Elton Hart is there. Manqoba?
Well, good morning,
Good morning, Manqoba.
The evidence that we heard here yesterday in court about this firearm, obviously crucial evidence that seems to suggest that this firearm had been stolen during a cash in transit heist. How significant is this evidence here in court and for the state?
No, Manqoba, one needs to actually look at it from this perspective to say, okay, this gun was stolen at a specific crime scene that has nothing to do with the Meyiwa trial, and it was used in subsequent commission of crimes. That shows that this gun has a tainted record for committing crimes. Now, what I gathered from Peter Smith's, it seems like they reclaimed this gun back at some stage from the police, and it was serial numbered, or was renumbered with a different serial number. So those things will all come into play, because one has to look at the timelines as to when was the gun stolen from SBV, when was it recovered, when did they reclaim the gun, and if the commission of the crime that we talk about in the Meyiwa trial on 26 October, when that gun was maybe reclaimed and it was in possession of SBV, then we can't say really that Mncube had the gun. Then it speaks to the narrative of the defense to say that this gun was planted and that bullet was planted at the crime scene, and that speaks to then tampering with the crime scene. That is where I'm currently at, but we'll still get some clarity. We'll hear from Meyiwa, because also the timelines doesn't add up. So it also opens that window to say that for a longer period, people could have tampered, came to the crime scene, planted evidence, as the defense has been saying all along.
And certainly, Alton, I know that the defense is certainly going to be pressing him around the crime scene and those registers, because they are contending that the crime scene was tampered. But let's speak about, Mosia himself and his evidence here before court. Of course, the expectation is that he's going to face more tough questions. He says he was at the scene at 6 a.m., but his registers say he only arrived 4 hours later. And of course, I think those will be the questions that the defense are going to ask as far as that is concerned. What do you think, is crucial from what the defense is hoping to achieve here?
No, indeed, the defense is going to go in and say that Meyiwa left the crime scene unattended. He left the crime scene somewhere the previous night. He only arrived maybe 12, 13 hours later. And the house was sort of cordoned off, but there was not really somebody actually making sure that nobody's entering and exiting that house. So at that given time, anything could have happened. And the crime scene, as Meyiwa recorded what he found 12, 13 hours later, was not the crime scene when the fatal shooting of Senzo Meyiwa happened. That is what the defense is saying. The defense is not disputing what they see on the pictures as Meyiwa and the other forensic investigator captured on the photos. They're not disputing that. They're saying the time lapses between when the crime was committed, you arriving first, leaving the crime scene, and arrive again that crime scene that you captured was not the same. And that's where the discrepancies come in, and that's where we're hammering on there was a tampering with the crime scene. And I don't know why Advocate Baloyi doesn't want to call the Ngobeni ladies, because they will come and testify to say that they found Mapiri busy cleaning the crime scene. So that in itself speaks to there was some cleaning up of the crime scene.
And just finally, Alted, of course, yesterday we also heard evidence from a traditional healer who has said that he consulted on one of the accused here in court. But of course, we know that he could not recall or point out to that particular person, Sibia Fiso, who's accused number one in this particular matter. He also could not give a time and a date as to when all of this happened. And of course, it calls into question the credibility of this particular witness. Is this something that you think the defense will be arguing and pushing for, that this was not a reliable witness? And is this an indictment for the state?
Calling somebody not to come and give oral evidence, already it's hearsay. Somebody has heard it from somebody. So for me, the court should not allow it, because if you're not going to call that witness and give the guarantees that you're going to call that witness, that evidence should not be allowed in court. And then the mere fact that he, who is the traditional healer, cannot remember dates, times, places, even pointing out of the person, specifically who the person is, that means already that evidence is not reliable. And once evidence is in that state, you can say it can only be introduced to the prejudice of the accused persons and not for fair trial reasons. And hence, I would say then the court should disregard that type of evidence.
Thank you very much, Alton, for your time. We really appreciate it. And of course, we're expecting those proceedings to start at 10 o'clock this morning. And we're expecting the defense to grill Thabo Mosia on some of the evidence that is presented here before court. So those proceedings are expected to start at 10 this morning.
Indeed, Manqoba, and we'll continue to see the defense poking some holes into the witness evidence in court. But we'll leave it there, and of course, as we anticipate what will come from the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial, Manqoba Mchunu will be stationed for us in court for the very latest.